listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. I am Deandra Glover Thomas, Program Coordinator for the Kentucky Autism Training Center, and I would like to welcome you to today's presentation, Antecedent Based Intervention. It will be presented today by Kim Howard, who is a field trainer for KATC. Kim Howard graduated from Morehead State University with an undergraduate degree in moderate to severe disabilities and graduate degrees in learning and behavior disorders and counseling. During the past 5 years, Kimberly taught Fleming County Structured Classroom, which was a classroom for children with autism or autism-like issues. She also was a member of Fleming County's autism cadre and was assigned to work in her district with classroom teachers who had students with autism that needed additional support to be successful in the regular classroom. In the past, Kimberly has helped the district decide on a diagnosis of educational autism when needed. In addition, she spent 2 years developing structured unit classrooms in preschool, elementary, and high school in Fleming and Menifee counties. In her current role at KATC, Kim provides direct training and technical assistance to education staff, social and community personnel, counselors, job coaches, and families. And without further ado, I'd like to change the presentation today over to Kim Howard. Good morning, Kim. Good morning, Kim. Can you hear me?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm talking away and I have it on mute.
Oh, okay.
Can you see my screen?
I can see your screen.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, thank you guys for joining me today. We're going to talk about antecedent-based interventions, which is probably, for me, it's one of my favorite interventions because I think that if I can put something into place before a problem behavior occurs, or I can put something into place that's going to make it much less likely for interfering behavior to occur for my students, why wouldn't I do that? If I can solve the issue or reduce the likelihood that I'm going to have an issue, this is antecedent-based interventions for me are kind of a no-brainer. These are the interventions that every classroom should think about first, at least in my opinion. Okay, so hopefully today you will leave with an understanding of what antecedent-based interventions are. You will leave with ideals for implementation and also some resources to assist with antecedent-based interventions. So what are they? And what antecedent-based interventions are, it's a collection of strategies. So it's not just one magical thing. It's a collection of strategies in which we're going to change the environment for the student. We're going to look at where is that student spending his time, or is it, it could be in a home, it could be in a classroom. I've put antecedent-based interventions into place for children in a Sunday school classroom. Where is that child at? And how can we change the environment where they're at to make it more likely or make it less likely that they're going to engage in intervention in interfering behavior, and to make it more likely that they're going to engage in the behavior that we want them to have in that environment, whatever that may be. And it is an evidence-based practice, which is an awesome thing, and that means that there is quite a bit of research out there that supports the use of this collection of interventions to be put into place. And for evidence-based practices purpose, they've specifically said preschool through high school age is kind of the target age that a lot of the research has came from. I've seen these be used successfully for other age ranges, but the target audience probably is going to be preschool through high school. And it's going to be used to increase on-task behavior. So where do we start with this at? Before you run into the environment and start making changes, I think that you would identify your interfering behavior. So for some students, maybe that is struggling to change from struggling with transition. You know, they are at a favorite activity and it's time to move on to the next activity and they struggle with that change. Maybe the interfering behavior is aggressive behavior. Maybe it's a student who's hitting their self or hitting others or engaging in some other type of aggressive behavior. Um, Maybe it's vocal behavior. I had a student who was engaging in um, basically noise making to attract attention to their self, and it was interfering with their ability to participate in the regular classroom. So first you need to identify that interfering behavior, and we'll talk about that, and then we're going to collect some data first, and we need a little bit of baseline data to say, because we want to be sure that we are um, treating the behavior. So if we know for sure that the behavior is caused by they want access to tangibles, then the way that we treat that behavior would be different than if we knew that the child was trying to escape. So that's why we're going to collect this ABC data. And truly, you're thinking, oh no, wait a minute, this is a functional behavioral analysis. Ah, wrong training. No, it's not. In order to I think to do this intervention effectively, you need to know a little bit about the ABCs of behavior. So I'm going to explain those real quick. So A is antecedent, and that is anything that happens right before the behavior occurs. B is obviously the behavior, and C is the consequence. So consequence can be what happened, is what happened after the behavior occurred. Did you redirect the student? Did you ignore the behavior? Did you prompt them? Did they, did people look at them? What happened? What was the consequence? And a consequence doesn't always, a lot of times when I say what was the consequence, everybody thinks, well, what punishment did they get? And it's not necessarily, that's not the case. It's what happened. And sometimes it's a natural consequence. But we need to know what that consequence is, because sometimes the consequence that's occurring feeds the behavior. And so it helps us to know those things. So here are some ABCs of behavior. Child sees a toy, child cries and screams, parent gives child the desired toy. And we all think to ourselves, I would never do that. I would never engage in giving my child that candy bar. But how many of us have been in the grocery aisle with our own children and it's the end of the long day and we're exhausted and tired, and they always put all of the rack of candy, right there at checkout. You've battled your way through the grocery store and, your child is, it's sometimes can be terribly difficult to get through the grocery store with a child. And so by the time you make it to the checkout aisle, you're just like, you know what, have a candy bar if it will make you stay with me and it will help you to engage in appropriate behaviors for a few minutes. And so when we look at ABCs of behavior, some of those that I've seen in classrooms would be, I had a student who he really liked nutty bars a lot. And to get nutty bars, at that time he did not have a functional communication system. And so the way that he got nutty bars was by screaming. He would walk to the cabinet where he knew nutty bars were located at and he would scream. Or, and if the scream didn't work right away, he would climb up and help himself to nutty bar. That's not safe, number one. He can't climb on my shelves and to help himself to nutty bar. And screaming is definitely a very interfering behavior in a classroom when you're working with multiple other children. So, so when we looked at those, our antecedent was his desire for nutty bar. The behavior was either the screaming or climbing onto the shelf. And the consequence was, at that point, he got himself the nutty bar. So it was pretty effective for him to engage in that behavior. He got what he desired. He got the nutty bar. And so knowing that that's what he wanted, us knowing that he was after nutty bar, changed what our intervention, the intervention that we put into place for him. So I like this recording sheet because I think when we look at ABC recording, that we need to know some information. And I think sometimes this can be a little bit intimidating. And this says client on there, but you can interpose whatever words you would like that to be. It could be student, it could be child. It doesn't matter to me. I like this because it prompts you through. And in my classroom, I needed multiple people to take ABC behavior. I could not be the only one who was doing that because I was not the only one with that child all day. So I needed something that would prompt the adults along in figuring, helping me decide what the behavior was and what was happening before and what was happening after the behavior. But there are lots of ABC charts out there. You can basically draw a line down and say ABC, and as long as you know what that means, then there's no necessarily right or wrong chart. It's what's going to work probably in your environment. So that's going to be something to think about first before you decide on antecedent-based interventions. You kind of need to decide what is the behavior that I'm trying to change, and what does that behavior, you need a good look at that behavior. What does that behavior look like, so that you'll be able to decide how best to change it and what interventions to put into place. So we're going to talk about functions of behavior because those are important to know for this, I think. So there are basically four basic functions of behavior. So it's children seeking access to tangibles. Now a tangible could be that nutty bar for my student. A tangible might be a toy. A tangible might be access to a favorite toy. It could be food items, anything that they can get, basically, anything that they can get and keep. Maybe the function of behavior is attention-seeking behavior. So my student I had a student who was going to the regular classroom, and he realized that if he fell out of his chair, that students would laugh at him, and he felt rewarded by that laugh. And so when they laughed, it increased the likelihood that he would fall out of his chair. And so we had to find an antecedent-based intervention that we could put into place before he fell out of the chair. We needed to find a way to help him get the attention he was seeking in a more appropriate way. Escape behavior. So these are the children that are, obviously they're running from the environment. They're either leaving the classroom or they're trying to escape from the classwork that you've put in front of them. So I had a kiddo last year in a classroom that we were working in who would run away, even in environments where I felt like he was fairly reinforced, lots of sensory items, lots of things. He would elope from the classroom, which is very frightening. I don't, if you've had that happen to you, you will understand how terrifying that can be when a child runs from you, and it can be very dangerous. So when we looked at interventions for him, it was important for us to understand what was the function of escaping for him, what was he getting out of that, and what we realized was that this little guy liked to be chased. He enjoyed it when the adults in his environment chased after him. And so we needed to figure out a way to put we knew he could not continue to escape from his environment, and because we were afraid he would be injured. And so we figured out a way for him to have adults chase him, but in a more appropriate environment. He could play a game of tag in the gym versus running out of the classroom. And so when we increased the opportunities for him to engage in getting attention from the adults and being chased, because for him it was a game, it happened a lot less often in the classroom. But if we hadn't looked at our ABCs of behavior, we might have put the wrong intervention into place. And if we had done that, then our behavior might have increased, the interfering behavior might have gotten worse versus getting better. So that's why it's important to know these things. And so the last function is automatic reinforcement, and this is sometimes the hardest one to change, because so automatic reinforcement might be a child who hand flaps. It could be typically, I think about it as children who are engaging in sensory activities, and so they reinforce their self. So this could look like students who rock and engage in that rocking behavior. It's harder to change the function of that behavior because they're automatically reinforced. So I can't block you rocking all day long. I can't block some of these. So automatic reinforcement, it's changeable, but it's important to know that that's what it is, because your treatment of the behavior is going to look a lot different in automatic reinforcement. Okay, so now that we know about ABCs of behavior and a little bit about functions of behavior, I want to talk about how to implement antecedent-based intervention. and where we go from there. Okay, so antecedent-based interventions might be just setting clear behavioral expectations, making sure that kids know what's expected of them, and being consistent. I see in a lot of settings that I work in classrooms that have multiple adults and children that are engaging in difficult behavior with, maybe with everyone or maybe with just some of the staff in the classroom, that there's not always clear behavior expectations across the board. Not all the adults have the same expectations. And so this can be confusing for students, and it can cause them difficulties when there isn't that consistency that they need. Um, Manipulating the learning environment, and so when we think about that, we think about pairing the learning environment with reinforcement. I have a student in the recent in the past few weeks that we worked with that when he gets to school, he's very upset. He does not want to walk into his classroom because in the past, in his perspective, he did not enjoy the activities that took place in there. So he has found that if he tantrums and refuses to come into the classroom, that he spends less time there because he spends a lot more time in the hallway engaging in very much interfering behaviors. And so what we've gone back and done is that we've made his classroom a much happier place for him. I'm not saying you should do that you have to do that permanently, but for the student, we've brought in activities that we know he really enjoys, and we've made sure that when he comes into the classroom, the first activity, the first item on his schedule is an activity that he's going to be very reinforced by, because we want him to come into the classroom and think, this is a good place to be, this is where I want to be at. And so those are things that we can consider when we look at antecedent interventions. Also, purposefully setting a schedule structure, so being consistent, having a same set schedule on an everyday basis is going to be really important for our learners with autism. And I know sometimes schedules changes, but if you've taught, and we'll talk a little bit about visual schedules later on, if you've taught children how to use a visual schedule and you've had a consistent schedule, then it's possible to teach children to be more acceptable to change. So looking at the location of instruction, some children, when they first come into school, I had a student who he would not sit at a desk. He was not, he was very aversive to sitting to a desk. So when I would ask him to sit down, he would tantrum. And so what I found for a while was that I needed to meet him where he was at, and we worked in the floor. I taught him on the rug because at that point he was not able to sit at the table. So it's something to consider. Decreasing or altering the task demand, and this is especially for students who are out in the regular classroom. Sometimes our higher kiddos who are a little higher functioning, who are able to be out in that regular classroom with their same age peers, and who really need to be there. I know the math class that my son is engaged in, sometimes the assignment is 50 problems. 50 problems in a sitting is overwhelming for a typical kid, let alone somebody who has other challenges. So thinking about, if you can show me that you know how to do multiplication, the type of multiplication that we're practicing today, if you can show me that you know how to do that in 20 problems versus 50, then maybe that will be more acceptable for you. So just thinking about decreasing or altering the task demand. And so priming, I love priming because it gives you a way to tell kids what's coming up. So there's two types of priming that I've done. I had a kiddo that I worked with who came to me before school started, and she was a big struggler in math. And for her, I kind of pre-taught some of the math skills that she was going to experience that day because I wanted her to go in and to have some success. So we kind of struggled together before she got to the regular classroom with some of her academic skills. And then you can also look at priming in another way. I'll give you an example with my son. My son played soccer a couple of years ago for the first time. And when he played soccer, what I found out was that he did not remember always to keep his hands off of his friends. And so he would sometimes run out onto the soccer field and kind of wrestle with people and not necessarily listen to his coach. And what I found was that right before he went out to the soccer field, if I got his attention and said, son, when you're out on the soccer field, remember, we don't touch other players and we listen to our coach. He needed that small reminder. And so what that might look like in the classroom was when I took my students out to recess and I said, all right guys, remember we stay on the area that has the playground equipment. We don't go to the fence that has the bull. There was a fence with it was a barbed wire fence that had a bull in it, so we never wanted students to be near the fence. So I gave them a reminder right before it happened, and that would be an example of priming. Behavior momentum is another antecedent intervention, and these are so easy that people think, well, that's not really an intervention, but it is. That's the nice thing about this, is that a lot of these interventions don't take material. They don't need necessarily a lot of pre-setup. It's things that the adult can do really quickly, and that's what I think I love about them so much. Behavior momentum is that if I know that I'm going to do something really challenging with a student or with a child and something that they're going to struggle with, I'm going to do one or two or three really easy things with them right before, because I want them to still feel successful. And we all know how hard it can be sometimes when we are struggling to learn new material or to meet a new expectation. So I would do something with a child that would be I know that they would be able to have success with right before I did an activity that would be very challenging. Other antecedent interventions would be placing specific demands. So sometimes we kill kids with our words. We overwhelm them with the amount of language that we give them. And so I've went into classrooms and I've seen teachers and I tell them, you're talking him to death. It would be much better for you to say sit and point to point to the chair that you want him to sit in than for you to say sit down in your chair and show me you're ready to work. And have had I have seen children who've said, I don't understand what you mean, you're using too many words. And sometimes we forget that we can overwhelm kids. Even typical kids sometimes can get overwhelmed by the amount of words that we throw at them. So if you have a student who is upset or a student who is struggling, then less words is probably better. And this is a great point where you could use a visual support, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Offering choice. And so this screen shows some of the choices that you might potentially be able to offer. I think offering students choice, and I think that we forget sometimes how many choices we are able to make in the day. I chose what to wear today. I even chose my location to work from today. I chose, when I go to a different setting, I can choose who I sit with. I choose who I talk to. So our students, especially students with disability, we frequently forget to allow them to have the opportunity to make choices. And when we do allow them to make choices, then it can increase the likelihood that they will do the things we want to do. So if I have a student who does not like academic work, I am going to place out two different types of activities, and I'm going to say, which activity would you like to do first? Would you like to do reading or math? Because in my classroom, we were able to make that choice. We were able to say, I would like to do this reading activity first versus this math. I'm going to put it off. Or I'd rather have this math done and get it over with. And it helped kids buy in to what I needed and wanted them to do. Other types of antecedent interventions would be pre-activity interventions and using learner preferences. So looking at what is it that kids like. So if I have a student who is crazy about horses and where I need them to write an article, or I need them to do a little bit of research for alternate portfolio or a writing activity, then maybe it's okay if they write about horses, and it makes it more likely that they are going to do the things that I need them to do. So we are going to talk about visual supports. Visual supports fall under antecedent-based interventions, and visual supports can make your day so much better, is what I have found. So we use visual supports every day. We stop at the red light, hopefully. My son would say, based on my behavior, my son would say a red light means stop, a green light means go, and yellow light means go faster. But we all use visual supports, and if you think about how many we use in the day, we look at body movement, we look at environmental cues. I'm running right now 4 different calendars that tell me where I'm supposed to be or where I should have been. So I have 4 different calendars in operation in my life right now, which is a little overwhelming. But sometimes we forget that we use these visual supports a lot as an adult, and so we don't think about how effective they could be for our students with autism and how different it can change their lives. So other examples of visual supports might be picture stories, behavior scripts, activities schedules, and we're going to look at some pictures in a minute. Why are visual supports important? It gives our kids time to focus, work at the meeting, and if you're working with a large group of people and you have a lot of people in and out, a visual support can also help you be more consistent in your expectations and routines for everybody involved with the child. Um, and it gives you a framework for talking about change. That's the part that I really like. And we know that learners with autism, they need that predictability. They crave, sometimes they crave that routine and that sameness. And so a visual support can give you the opportunity to decrease anxiety for them so they know what's coming up next, they know what's going to happen, and it allows you to build in a framework for change. So these are some of the visuals that I have used in classrooms. A stop sign can be very effective, and you can kind of see the shelving area. And sometimes the visual support can be actually covering up shelves. These shelves back here had a lot of materials on them that were very visually stimulating for some of the students that I was working with. And so they simply covered up the shelves and put a stop sign on them saying that, this wasn't student access. And now this toilet paper with the little bow tie bar, this is from a preschool classroom, and they had a bathroom in their classroom, which is pretty common, I think. And what was happening was that children were using a lot of toilet paper. Head Start, preschool age is kind of when kids are just learning to be potty trained, and they didn't know how much toilet paper to use. And so the teacher put this little bow tie, an appropriate length down, and said, this is the amount of toilet paper you take each time. If you need more, you can get more, but you should never take more than this much toilet paper at one time. And crazily enough, it helped the students stop from engaging in behaviors that were clogging up the toilet, unfortunately, in the classroom and wreaking havoc when you have that to deal with. And so this is something that you could put anywhere. And a lot of young children probably need that visual support. So this example here, this little visual support, the yellow wait card, so we have to teach students how to wait, and waiting is difficult. Waiting is very difficult. And so I use this in a kindergarten classroom. I had a student who whenever he needed something, he would follow behind the regular education teacher, asking her over and over, and she had 28 other 5-year-olds in her classroom, so it was a very large setting. He did not have a one-to-one aide, and he was very functional, but this waiting was very difficult for him. And so what we did was, and what we found was that when he had a visual support, so we would give him this circle, and actually his was a triangle, and it doesn't, it can look like whatever you want it to look like. His was a triangle, and we would hand it to him, and the teacher, and it gave him the acknowledgement that yes, the teacher is going to come back to you to help you when she's asked you to wait. And it was also helpful to the teacher, because what would happen is sometimes when she would ask him to wait, she would forget to come back to him, not because she was a bad teacher, but because she had a lot of students who all needed help. And so it also gave her the ability to remember that she was coming back to him to assist him. So some other types of visual supports might be, these top 2 pictures are examples of workstations. A workstation can be a visual support for a student who does not know how to engage in learning behavior, and a student who needs a lot more organization for being able to sit and maintain attention to a task. I love these clocks. They turn, you pull the red out, and as the time diminishes, the red goes away. And so it gives a student who does not know how to tell time, and a student who, sometimes I've had students who their vision of time is very skewed. What they feel like was, they said, I waited 30 minutes for you. really it was probably just about 3 minutes, but the way that time felt to them and their difficulty that they had with waiting for things, it gave them the ability to see. So I might use this type of time timer. I might use it for maybe it's recess time, indoor recess, and I'm going to put 20 minutes on the clock, and I'm going to say, all right, guys, when the red's gone, then it's time for us to move on to our next scheduled activity. Just an example of a way that you could use visually show time. This is duct tape. I will tell you that duct tape, packing tape, and Velcro, I wish I had bought stock in the company. This is duct tape on the floor. And I have used this in classrooms to where I had children who did not understand where their space was. They were not able to um, they had a struggle with staying in their place. So I had a teacher tell a student, I want you to stay in your chair. And so what the little guy did was he dragged that chair with him. He dragged it across the classroom, and he was still kind of following her, and he was just dragging his chair with her, and he was still sitting in it. He'd done what she had said, and she came to me and she goes, he's not listening. He's got his chair all over the room. I can't get anything done. He's falling behind me with his chair, and he needs all this stuff. And it's my same little guy that had the weight card in kindergarten. And so what we did was we knew that his chair needed a resting place. And so his chair and himself, they had to stay inside of the taped area. So it gave him a visual boundary. Yes, he could definitely easily step over the tape, but he needed that visual support. He needed that reminder, and he was able to accept staying inside of the tape. And what his teacher did for a little while was that if he requested help, and he stayed inside of the taped area, then he got a gold star, and he had kind of a reward chart that helped, a reinforcement chart that helped make it more likely that he would engage in the behavior that the teacher wanted. So we're going to talk a little bit about visual schedules. And first I want to say there are a ton of other visual supports that could be used as antecedent-based interventions, and I did not have enough time in the day to put enough pictures in there of all of them. And so the ring cards that show like the stop and wait and feet on the floor, those would be an example of a visual support that would fall under antecedent-based intervention. First then cards would be a great example of a visual support for children with autism that need assistance and motivation in moving from one activity to the next. There are a ton of things that fall under visual support, so I didn't really have enough time today to bring them all out. But what I do have is my email address is on the last slide, and if you want I have a PDF collection of visual support. So if you watch this and you would like access to that, if you shoot me an email requesting it, I can send it to you for free. It's not things that I've made, it's just things that I found and collected over a span of time that were really good visual supports that would definitely fall under antecedent-based intervention. Okay, so we're going to talk about visual schedules. I think that we as adults use visual schedules. I talked about my 4 calendars that I'm running right now, and I'm able to remember, like in my day today, I have a list in my head of all the things that I need and want to get done. I knew I had a webinar. I knew I needed to work on some other material that I need to get prepared. So I'm able to keep that in my head. For our learners with autism, sometimes they have issues with short-term memory. So if I tell you, okay, it's time for math, you hear me, the child with autism hears me, but they may not be able to retain that in their working memory. And so they get going to an activity, and then halfway there they forget what they're doing, or they get distracted. They see their favorite toy on the ground, they see their favorite toy, or they see somebody having a snack, and they get distracted on the way there. So the teacher looks at the child and they go, "What are you supposed to be doing?" And the child looks at the teacher and either looks very confused because they really may not remember what it was that they were supposed to be doing. And frequently what I see happen is that when this is occurring, adults think that the students are dragging their feet, they don't want to go on to the next activity, and so they feel like this is a behavioral issue when it really might be a working memory problem. And it could be a behavior issue, but it also could be a working memory problem. They may not be able to know what happens next if you just are telling them orally. And a visual schedule is an easy way to provide them with that visual reminder of what's coming next and what does our day look like. And frequently what happens is when a child is diagnosed with autism, then they are also diagnosed with anxiety. Not every child with autism has anxiety, but quite a few of them do. And so they have anxiety about what's coming in the day. And when a child gets enough anxiety or engages in a lot of worry type behavior, then what can happen is that they engage in fight or flight mode, and it can become a very difficult problem to help your classroom to continue to function when you have a student who's in a constant state of anxiety about what's coming next, what are we doing today, oh, I want to go to gym, is it gym day, is it gym day? So a visual schedule is a really easy to put into place for kiddos that have those kinds of issues. So when you're thinking about putting in a visual schedule, you need to individualize the schedule. And you need to think about some things, and you need to know information about your student, and you need to think about some things before you try to put this into place. So what type of schedule is needed? Is the student stationary? Are they in a self-contained unit in the same classroom all day? And if that's the case, then maybe they need a strip schedule on the wall. And I'll show some pictures of these in a few minutes. If it's a student who is traveling from classroom to classroom, then they probably need a portable schedule, one that they're going to be able to take with them. And we'll look at some examples in a few minutes. How long is the schedule able to be? So a student who needs to know just the next activity might be overwhelmed by knowing everything they're going to do in the whole day. So maybe their schedule is only 2 items long at a time. But a student who does really well with that and who is able to know more about what's coming in the day, maybe they want the whole day listed out. And that's okay too. It's going to be based on what your student needs. So it's going to be important when you're thinking about a schedule to look at what does each student need. Now I've went into some really good classrooms, and every child in the classroom has exactly the same schedule. They're all using the same type of picture cards. They're all using the same type of setup. And I love that that teacher has really tried and put in the effort. But realistically, I know that that same schedule, not every child in her class is probably going to function well off the same type of schedule. And who is going to be responsible for maintaining the schedule? Who's going to keep up with those picture cards, and who's going to help the students set it up? Those are just some things that you need to think about before you put a schedule into place, because they're kind of the questions that can make it work really well or make it be a failure. So this is schedules at a glance, and this takes you from object schedules, students who don't understand what a picture communicates and isn't at the level of a picture, then maybe they need actual objects, and I do have a picture of that in a minute. So I had a student who needed an object schedule, and on his schedule was for lunchtime there was a fork on his schedule, and then he went to art, and on art time was a paintbrush, a real paintbrush velcroed right to the schedule. So those are some examples of what an object schedule might look like. So pictures schedule, this could be a real photograph, this could be a black and white picture, this could be a line drawing, or symbolic pictures, more like a board maker or writing with symbols or symbol sticks, some of those pictures. Or maybe it's a student who's able to read, and they are going to have a written word schedule. It's just the words written out, and that's okay too. If it's a student who is a reader, then it's completely appropriate to have them use a picture schedule, but make sure they're able to read the schedule words. Some of the mistakes that I've seen is that yes, they're a reader, but maybe they're only reading at a pre-primer level, so they're not completely ready to just have a word. So what they really needed was a combination of a picture and a word to help them be more successful with their schedule. So these are some pictures of schedules, and this long one here is an example of an object schedule. You can see they've found miniatures and they've kind of put them in these little sacks and Velcroed them up there, and this is what his day will look like. So each of these items possibly he's going to use when he gets to the activity that he's going to next, or else it's a symbolic representation that the student is able to understand. I like this example with the whiteboard. It has a larger schedule across the bottom, has a basket to keep them in, and then a little finished basket. But then it tells you when you get to reading. This child is specifically already at a reading center, so it's language arts time. He knows when he's at the reading center, he needs to read past pages 1 through 5, and it gives him a specific instruction when he gets there. These examples down here are kind of up on the wall, and these are students who are probably in this classroom from, at least during this time period, they're in this classroom, and they're able to come back to this one set spot to check their schedule, and that works. And I like this as an example. I don't know if you're able to see the whole picture, but these are pictures of a school, the little tiny yellow pictures, and then these here on the side are pictures when you're home. And I had a student who was struggling to understand what days was she at school and what days was she at home. And so this is a schedule that, a monthly schedule that is up on the wall at her house. And as the day comes, they take the picture off on her way out the door, or else they take the picture off in the morning, because they were struggling with a child who she really liked to come to school. And so she would get up every day at 6 a.m. to come to school, and so on days when it was not school day and the bus didn't come, she would get very upset. And it created a lot of problems at home for mom, because she would spend a couple of hours on the weekend mornings being very upset because the bus didn't come. And so she needed a way to understand when school would happen and when school wouldn't happen. So I think this was a great way to use to do that. And it was pretty simple to make. So some things to think about before you introduce the child to the schedule. So you need to have made it, obviously. So you're going to gather up all your materials, and you're going to know what kind of schedule will you be using. You're going to decide where it will be located, and that's where you're going to start with it at. So we're going to introduce the schedule to the child, and so when I teach a schedule, I teach it, I want students to know do it correctly the first time. So I'm probably going to, if it's a student that I'm able to touch and they're not going to become upset by me hand over hand prompting them, I am probably going to physically prompt them through checking the schedule. And if it's a higher functioning student, then maybe that they're going to be able to learn from me modeling for them, then possibly I'll model it. So but before you give this schedule to the child, as the adult, I always, I practice it with my staff members, which I know sounds a little bit crazy, especially for my more complicated and difficult students. I practice what that would look like, so that if I have the steps memorized in motor memory, it's going to be easier for me to prompt the student through it. And you want to model those steps exactly as you want the child to do it. You don't want to teach them something and then think, oh, you know, that's not what I meant. So that's why I would practice it. And I limit verbal directions for this. I want them to be, my goal is that I'm going to be able to fade myself out. I want them to be independent with a schedule. I want them to be able to take this at some point and be as independent as possible. And I know that if I'm using my voice to prompt them or to give them directions, then it's much harder for me to fade myself out than it is for me to fade out a physical prompt. So that's why I would go physical prompting versus telling students what to do. So also you're going to think about providing prompts and support through the whole schedule. So you're going to ensure success the whole time, and you're going to reinforce. So when I had students who had a lot of behavioral struggles, it was students who had a lot of behavioral difficulties. When I introduced the schedule, I didn't start out with the things I wanted them to do, because I wanted I wanted them to know that the schedule could be a happy place and good things happened on there. So if I had started out with the activities that I needed done, so alternate portfolio, I needed OT, I needed communication time. I needed things like that. I needed activities for me to happen, but I knew that if I did that, I would set myself up to fail, and I'd set my students up to fail. So what I did for my students when I was introducing the schedule was for a day or two, all the things, or even just a day, the things on that schedule were very happy. So when he first came, for my very much struggling student, when he came to the schedule, it said the first activity was play the iPad. So and so took him to the iPad and he played for the allotted time. You know, my red timer went off and he came back to check the schedule. Well, then we went to the computer. Computer was a very happy place for him. And so so he was thinking, you know, about the second time, first time of checking the schedule, he was kind of like, what is happening? You know, because he didn't understand right away. And so, but he was happy to get the iPad, he was happy to get the computer. And so I looked at a day of setting up things, like it was his favorite activities day. And I know that sounds crazy, and I've had teachers tell me, but I don't have time to put so much fun. But I think that if you take a day or two and and what you're teaching during that time is you're teaching how to use a schedule. You're teaching them how to survive and have a little bit of independence. So it's not a wasted instructional day. You're setting up your classroom for success, and you're giving the student that opportunity to have really good success using that schedule, and then you're able to work in activities that you need. So you need reading time, you need time to teach academics, you need time to teach motor skills, and then you're able to include those things on the schedule. But it's going to be a lot more successful if in the beginning you've done a lot of reinforcing activities for the student to help them be able to be more successful. And you're going to reinforce. So if it's a student who's reinforced by edibles, then maybe I'm going to I'm going to give you a tiny piece of an M&M for each successful step, and you'll have to decide what reinforcement might look like for your child, because it's going to be individualized for every student. So helpful hints. I wanted you to have success with this. So helpful hints would be, so when I had students check schedule, I don't want to have to forever say check schedule, because that's a verbal prompt. What I did was, this talks about a poker chip and a popsicle stick, but what I did was I had a student's name on a little card, and they had a matching name card next to their schedule. So I was able to hand them the name card, and when they got their name card handed to them, they automatically went to their schedule and checked it. And it worked really great, because anybody in my classroom, when it was time for you to move on, hand you your name card, you were automatically redirected back to your schedule. You could check that item and move on to the next activity. And it made my classroom run so smoothly. And I will tell you a funny story about how successful that can be. I had two very aggressive students, two very involved students with autism, and who both had a lot of complex needs and a lot of complex issues that we had taught and we're in the process of still teaching how to use a visual schedule, because I, eventually when you reach the point to where you're including activities that children don't like, it gives you a way, they're realizing that, so I don't have to say it's math time if you hate going to math. You're able to be mad at the schedule, and it gives me that ability to where if you're upset that it's math time, I can say, oh, it's on the schedule, come on, we'll get it done, and then we'll move on to the next thing. But my two kiddos were in the classroom together, and one day my second student, I'll call him John. John got very upset, and I could not figure out why John was so upset, and he went to the wait chair and was waiting for the occupational therapist, and I knew it wasn't occupational therapy day. So I went and I looked at his schedule, and his schedule said OT. And I told my assistants, I said, oh my gosh, guys, who messed up John's schedule? Because John really liked OT, and I knew I was in trouble at this point, because now the schedule was in wrong. And all the adults in my classroom go, no, we'd never do that. And I didn't think that they would. And so I thought, well, I need to watch this. I need to figure out what's happening here. So I got to watching what was happening, and my little girl, I'm going to call her Annie. Annie had realized that she could give, and she was a student with severe autism, nonverbal primarily. She could give John the check schedule card, and John would check his schedule for her as well because he knew no matter who gave him that card, he was very much, he had learned that he checked the schedule. And so she liked to hear people cry, and so she found out that she could make John cry by placing OT on his schedule when it was not OT time and asking him to check his schedule. So we had to lock his cards, some of his cards, out of access for her, and then look at her schedule to make sure she was a little bit more busy. But anyways, that's, I think, how successful that it can be, is that two young students, early elementary school, both nonverbal, both with severe issues, and both with autism, they were able to, she was able to learn how to be successful enough with the schedule that she learned how to set up and manipulate other people's schedules. And it wasn't good on our end, but it was, for me, it was a very telling moment in that it showed me the capability and the success that my students could have with using a visual support and using a schedule. So these are some other examples of individual schedules, and these are whole class schedules at the top, and these are just little individual schedules at the bottom. So just different examples, and it can look like whatever works for in your classroom. And these are just pieces of poster board. This is just a cut piece of poster board that's been laminated and some Velcro. It doesn't have to be brand new store-bought. And this is kind of what I used in my classroom. These are on the end of a shelf. So if a student had a work area, it was on their work area to where I was redirecting them back to their work area. And this is an example of a visual schedule for a student who was able to read. And so his schedule just went down the side. The extra pieces went in this little pocket pouch. And then he had materials in his 3-ring binder because we wanted him, he was out in the classroom with other students. So when you're thinking about setting up a schedule for a student, you think about the environment where they're at. I wouldn't want to give a child a schedule that would make them stand out with their peers. So I would try to mimic items already in that peer's classroom. And for this kiddo, a 3-ring binder was very successful. This is an individual schedule that's written. I have used an index card to write a quick schedule on for students that something had changed, and so we were able to write a quick schedule down with that, just on a piece of paper. So I thank you guys for attending this today, and there is my email address, and you're welcome to email me if you have any questions. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Kim, for presenting today's presentation.
Thank you.
All right, and I'd like to thank everyone else for coming out today. And if you have any questions, feel free to email Kim. And also you can view any of our webinars on our YouTube channel. It's Kentucky Autism Training. Thanks again. Goodbye.